Hello and welcome to By the Book. I'm your host, Joe Hebert. Today we continue our course on truth, justice, and leadership with a study of Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologiae. In previous episodes, we looked at the concept of theology itself. First of all, is theology necessary beyond philosophy? And then, can we actually do theology in the sense of can we actually reason about God or the things of God? And the things that God has said to us in divine revelation. So, a few of the things we saw include that, the basic framework is that Aquinas looks at theology as our response to information that God has provided. And the framework is that God is a rational being speaking to rational beings. So, it's something that not only can we reason about it, but we must reason about it. So in a sense, these things are above our nature, but that's precisely why God is speaking to us and giving us some extra help, so to speak. But in another sense, we have to do the reasoning for ourselves. That's how we're made. We have to think for ourselves. Now, since we're not capable of adequately resolving all these questions on our own, again, we need assistance, but the assistance is not replacing our own efforts to reason. So when we're doing theology, as with any science, there are certain premises, certain starting points or principles that are not being questioned within that science itself. They are the presuppositions of doing that science. But they are meant to be employed. They're meant to be utilized. And the utility of them, the value of them will be seen in their use. So this is something that we'll have to track as we go through portions of the Summa Theologiae and see how Aquinas does this. So as we go through, we're going to see that he is constantly philosophizing. He's using the tools of Socratic philosophy, but he is also drawing upon divine revelation, and he is thinking or reasoning about how these things go together and what they combined, what they're able to tell us about God, about the world, and about ourselves. So for those of you who are following along in the Summa as a whole, it's a very large work, and we are skipping from the first part of the Summa, where we looked at a couple of articles, and we're now going to be dipping into what is called the first part of the second part. The second part is so big it's divided into two parts itself. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the parts of the Summa because we're not really doing anything like a comprehensive study of the Summa itself. But what we're looking at today is going to be what Aquinas calls the last end. And the term, and he's talking about human beings, for human beings. And what he means by an end in this context is a goal. So this is another way to put this would be, what is the purpose of human life? Why are we here? What are we doing? What are we trying to accomplish with our lives? And you can see how that's a philosophical question, which he will be philosophizing about, but it's also something that faith has a lot to tell us about. So we're going to look at the prologue to this section because in the prologue, Aquinas introduces this topic and where it fits into the Summa as a whole. And he thereby characterizes really what we're going to be doing in this course in the portions of Aquinas that we're going to be looking at in this course. Since he says, as Damascene, this is St. John Damascene, the church father, states in his treatise on the Orthodox or the true faith, man is said to be made in God's image. So we know this comes from, of course, the book of Genesis, where it says God created man in his image. But what does that mean? Aquinas here is tapping into St. John Damascene for some interpretation of what does it mean that we're made in the image of God. And he says, insofar as the image implies an intelligent being endowed with free will and self-movement. So he'll come back to this in just a second. But as mentioned, it's, God speaking to us as one reasonable being to another. There's something special about the relationship between human beings and God, because even though God is infinitely above us, we are made in his image in a very particular way. And Aquinas says, first of all, that's our intelligence. Along with this goes free will. We could get in. We will be getting a little bit more into that later, what he means by that, and self movement. So, in other words, unlike anything else in creation, aside from angels, anything else on Earth, basically, human beings are the only creatures on Earth who think for themselves and make decisions for themselves and actually move themselves. Animals, of course, move around, but they're following instincts. They're not reasoning about what to do. They're reacting in very predetermined ways. And of course, inanimate objects are even less self-moving. They simply follow the laws of gravity and other physical laws in how they move. So this is part of our being in the image of God, is that we are able to choose and act freely and to move in ways that are much freer than anything else in creation. So looking at the structure of the Summa, he says, now that we have treated of the exemplar, that is God, and he's looking at God as an exemplar in this context, because God, of course, comes first, and his reason is the absolute reason. His freedom is absolute freedom. His self-movement is absolute. Ours is a sort of an imitation of his. So he's the exemplar. Even if you're thinking about human nature, and this is important to realize for Aquinas, human nature is what it is, but from the very beginning, it is a kind of an imitation of something else, which is God. So just like if you made a little statue of a human being, you could say, well, yeah, it's a little statue. It has all the qualities of a little statue, but it's also relevant to know, was this made to look like Napoleon, or was this made to look like Lincoln, or something like that? Because that has a meaning. It's referring to something else. So when we look at human nature, that's the way Aquinas looks at it. It is what it is, but it's also reflecting something that is much greater than itself at the same time. And so the Summa began with a study of God, who in relation to us is the exemplar of what we are, and of those things which came forth from the power of God in accordance with his will. That is, how did God create the world? Why did he create it? And those kinds of things. We're skipping over all that, obviously highly relevant material to get into his theory of human nature. It remains for us to treat of his image, that is man. So again, he's looking at, from the very beginning, looking at human nature, he's saying we're looking at the image of God in human beings. That's what it's all about, inasmuch as he too is the principle of his actions. So he's again repeating that human beings are unique among earthly creatures for being the source of our own actions, and that this is something that makes us like God in a crucial sense, having free will and control of our own actions. But of course, we know that possessing free will and control of our own actions is a blessing in some ways, and it's also a challenge in other ways. We misuse this freedom, and we do bad things, and in a sense, that's what the drama of political and social life, and even individual life, is all about. Trying to make better choices, or trying to figure out what to do about the bad choices that have been made in the past. So today we're just going to look at the concept of a last end or a goal, and how Aquinas is going to tie this into human nature. So he starts with the very basic question, whether it belongs to man to act for an end. And here we're going to do a lot of skipping, of course, in this course, because we're doing barely a fraction of the Summa. So here we're going to skip the objections and the replies to the objections, and just take a quick look at what Aquinas has to say about this particular question. Do we have an end? Because obviously one possible position philosophically is somebody could say, well, there is no actual end or purpose to human life. Life is meaningless. We might make stuff up that my life is going to be about this or that, but we're just making those things up. What does Aquinas have to say about this from philosophy and from scripture? So his sed contra On the contrary, his authority here is Aristotle. So this is a very philosophical argument. It's taking a particular philosophical perspective on this, a classical Socratic philosophical perspective. But there's also a concept here that we can see resonates very strongly with Revelation, because he says all things contained in a genus are derived from the principle or the beginning of that genus. Now, the term genus, we could look at the technicalities of genus and species and so forth. But broadly speaking, the word genus means a kind of thing. Okay, and if we think about in Genesis, the story of creation, God creates things according to their kinds. So it's emphasized in Revelation that God is not just randomly creating things that, each of which may be some unique, totally unique thing. God creates things in categories or kinds. And so both Aristotle and Scripture are in agreement on this, that it's useful for us to understand what kind of thing a thing is. Because sure, each particular thing could have some particular or unique qualities, but what something is, what kind of thing it is, tells us a lot about it. And it reduces a lot of the uncertainty and randomness of things. So if we think about the idea of humankind for a minute, do we believe that there is something in common, that human beings are a kind of thing? So even though we're each unique as persons, we're all the same kind of thing, and we have certain essential things in common. We might like to emphasize our individuality and our uniqueness, but what if literally we had no common ground with the people around us? What would that do to the possibility of living in community, in society with other people? How would we interact with other people if we didn't know what kind of a thing they were? We didn't really know if, is this a tree, or is this a person, or is this, a rocket ship? What is this? So that would make things just immensely complicated. So it's important that we belong to a certain kind. It doesn't take away our individuality, but it means that it puts it within certain boundaries. And that's going to be essential to understanding Aquinas' treatment of this whole subject of the end or purpose of human life. Now, the end is the principle in human operations, as the philosopher states. So remember, principle is a beginning point. The principle is sort of foundational in any particular area that we're looking at. What makes something what it is? That's kind of the beginning for understanding something. But in practical matters, in human operations, as he puts it here, the beginning is the end. So if you're going to do something, the first question absolutely has to be, what am I doing? If you don't know the answer to that question, how on earth would you begin doing anything at all? Are you trying to brush your teeth, or are you trying to fly to the moon? If you don't know, then you have no idea what to do first, second, third. So the beginning is the end. The first thing to know is, what am I trying to accomplish? From that point, you can start thinking about how to get there, and that becomes determinative of the operation that you're performing. So within the kind, of humankind, the principle that makes us human has to attach to some kind of end. In other words, one way to put this is that the purpose of our existence is to become who we are, is to realize our nature or realize our potential, that it's built into our human nature, our humanity, that we are attempting to live in a certain way. And again, we could say, well, don't people have different goals in life and so forth? Yeah, we'll see in a minute. Aquinas completely understands that. But again, he's trying to point to the fact, if there wasn't something common about the goals we have, if there wasn't a common goal within which all these other goals fit, then ultimately it wouldn't really mean anything to say that we share human nature, that we share humanity. And the implications of that would be massive, as mentioned before. We could even mention a lot more. which perhaps we may as we go through the course. So in case we had any doubts either about the veracity of this or what does this mean exactly, that we have some kind of common end, Aquinas unpacks it in his answer. And this is a very important, again, framing, kind of statement for what we're going to be looking at. Of actions done by man, those alone are properly called human, which are proper to man as man. So there's things that we share with animals or amoebas, and yeah, those are parts of our reality, but properly speaking, you can't call those human because they don't distinguish us from other animals or even plants or organisms. So what is it that is distinctively human about us? That's what we need to think about if we're going to study human nature. Now, man differs from irrational animals in this, that he is a master of his actions. So just from an experiential point of view, without even doing a lot of philosophizing, it's easy to see that this is a massive difference. If you look at squirrels in one place or another place or one day or the next day, they're going to be the same all the time. The only difference is ever going to be they're reacting maybe to somewhat different environment or different circumstances. But if you look at human beings in different places at different times, you see much more radical diversity. And why is that? Precisely because human beings are masters of their actions. So this is one of the ways you see that the argument from diversity does not undermine this position of what we have in common, in part because that's part of what we have in common, is that we are not determined, nailed down to an exact way of doing things. But where does that come from? How do we have that ability? What gives us that ability? It's not, magic, right? Why do some animals always behave the same way, but we can do so many different things? And so the next step, he said, this is what's properly human. This is what differentiates us. Now, why is it? Man is a master of his actions through his reason and will, whence too the free will is defined as the faculty of will and reason. So we're not going to probe right now exactly what is the relationship between reason and freedom, but suffice to say, it's because we don't simply respond to stimuli. We actually think about what things are. And as we're going to see in a minute, we therefore can evaluate things. This is good or bad. It's not just an instinctive emotional response, but we can rationally try to categorize things and analyze things. And then we can base a decision on that. So this abstraction from what we experience into concepts that we can reason about, let's just say, for a quick version, this gives us a tremendous freedom. We have a much broader range of possible responses that come up because we can do so much in our mind with the information that we have and come up with so many different possible angles on how to deal with the world. Therefore, those actions are properly called human, which proceed from a deliberate will. So he's just rationing this in. He's saying, okay, what's unique about us? It's our self-governance, but where does that come from? It comes from our reason and will. So he keeps coming back and saying that's what human nature is our reason and will that differentiates us from the other animals. And if any other actions are found in man, they can be called actions of a man, but not properly human actions. So yes, we do a lot of things, anywhere from the biological processes that operate within us to just random little things that we do. You can certainly call these actions of human beings. They're actions that certain human beings are taking, but they're not human in the strict sense because they don't differentiate us. They're not proper to us. Now, it is clear that whatever actions proceed from a power are caused by that power in accordance with the nature of its object. So here he's getting even more specific about reason and free will. These are powers. And again, they're not magic. So free will doesn't mean that we're completely free without constraints. If so, that would undercut what he's going to go on to argue, that there is, for example, a definite end to our existence, and we are not free to change that end, and we are not free to reject that end. We can reject it only in the sense that we can reject the concept of it. We can reject specific steps that would take us to it. But even as we're doing that, we're contradicting ourselves, because deep down, by nature, that's what we want. We want the end that's built into us. So free will is not an absolute thing. It exists based on a faculty of reasoning, which gives us a certain scope of freedom way beyond animals. It doesn't mean that we have an infinite scope of freedom. So he's now digging a little into that, and he's saying, okay, what is that scope of, what is that power? What is the nature of this power that makes us free and self-determining, which is the reason? And he says the object of the will is the end and the good. So we're going to dig in later. In fact, we'll be very soon, we're going to start digging into what exactly is meant by the good. But this is a very Socratic point that we see here, and we saw this in Plato, that when we are thinking rationally and deciding whether to do something, the precise question we're asking to ourselves is it good? And so the good, in this sense, is what all of our actions are aiming at. And that is the end. The good that is determined by reason, the good that is discerned by reason, is the universal goal of human actions. And even the things that differentiate us when we do things differently would be because of different opinions that we may have about the good, or because of different ways that may be necessary in different contexts to achieve the good, or because of different subcategories of the good, different types of goods that we are focused on at different times. But what here we can see conceptually what unites all human beings and all of their actions all the time is that they are attempting to understand what's good, and they're attempting to do what is good. And this is the most fundamental sense in which we are all united by a common end, the end that is built into our nature. But, somebody might say, okay, fine, in a very abstract sense, we all have the same, end, which is to do what's good. But is there any actual good that is the same for all of us? Or is there really just an almost infinite variety of things that we conceptualize as good, but different people will conceptualize different things as good? So we're really being united. We're just united by this degree of diversity that is staggering. That wouldn't be much of a unity, and it also wouldn't necessarily help too much to clarify if we have doubts about our lives and what we're trying to do. It might not help too much just to say, well, it could be anything, right? And there's an infinite variety of stuff. So this question comes up: whether all men have the same last end. Is there any specific way that we can identify that everybody's life is focused on a particular thing, which is the same for everybody? Now, as you can imagine, there could be objections to this. So here I do want to look at the objections before looking at his answer, and then we can see how he responds to them. So the first objection is an interesting one. It's from the concept of sin, and we might have more to say about this later, but this can get us to start thinking about one of these categories that I wouldn't say it really actually comes from Scripture exclusively, because the concept actually is known to philosophy, but it is given a very particular meaning and force within the context of Scripture. So I want to start thinking about how does Aquinas understand this concept, both philosophically and theologically. It would seem that all men have not the same last end, for before all else, the unchangeable good seems to be the last end of man. We saw before that the good, in some sense, is the goal that we all share. Here he says even more emphatically, the unchangeable good. If there's a unifying end that we share, there has to be some kind of permanently good thing, something that's always good for everybody, that would unite us. But he says, some turn away from the unchangeable good by sinning. Therefore, all men have not the same last end. Now, we'll see the most fundamental problem with this argument which will recur quite a bit in a lot of the objections, is that it's confusing the objective and the subjective. So some turn away from this good. Does that mean that it's not actually good for them? This is probably the most crucial concept in this course, and particularly in our study of Aquinas, is to see the error of this, because I think it's an extremely common error in modern culture to think so subjectively that if somebody rejects something, that in a sense it doesn't exist for them, right? Now just imagine, if there's an elephant in the room and I say, I don't believe that this elephant is here, does that mean it's not here? Clearly that's absurd, right? And that's the whole point of that expression, the elephant in the room. You can pretend it's not there, but it's there. And that's what Aquinas would say about the good, as we'll see as we dig into this, that the good is what it is because it's built into our nature. Some things are good for us and some are not. And whatever is unchangeably universally good for human beings, that's a fact that we can't help. So going back to Plato, we saw that Socrates he kept using the example of health of the body, because that's something where you can see people might neglect their health. They might decide, well, I want to eat stuff that's bad for me. I want to lie around instead of exercising. Yeah, people subjectively can do that, but it damages their health. That's clearly, you can't choose not to you can't choose to change what health means. Health is what it is. And that's the same thing with the soul, Socrates argued, and that's exactly what Aquinas is going to be doing here as well. The other thing I want to mention, though, in terms of the term sin, is you can see, even from the objector's point of view, where Aquinas is going to agree with this, sin is fundamentally the same thing as vice, and vice is the opposite of virtue. And virtue is a good habit which is rooted in reason. So basically, for Aquinas, what sin fundamentally is doing things that are harmful and they're unreasonable. Now, it's true that the term sin is focusing on the fact that this is offensive to God. That's what is being highlighted when we use the word sin. Whereas with the word vice, we may or may not be specifically thinking about the fact that it offends God. But the fact is that what makes something sinful is that it is unreasonable and bad. And so why does it offend God? Because he is good and he wants us to do what is good. So this is a very important harmonizing point between Socratic philosophy and theology for Aquinas, that what God wants for us is what is good. And therefore, sin, or turning away from God, is also turning away from our own good. Sin is always harming ourselves, just as Socrates argued in the Gorgias that vice is a sickness of the soul. Sin is a sickness of the soul, and it's not good for us. It's not like there's a contest between our good and the good and God's will or something. God wants us to be happy and healthy, basically, is what it comes down to. And if we're doing things that are unhealthy, that's what is called sin in Scripture. Now we have the argument from diversity, which is a very important one. I mean, today this would be heavily emphasized, but Aquinas sees it very clearly, even in the Middle Ages. It's obvious enough in any society that many people are living very different lives, or they're focused on very different things. That's a good and a healthy aspect of society. Now, some of it could be bad, but a lot of it is good. A lot of it is not only okay, but actually essential for our society to thrive. So he says, the objector says, man's entire life is ruled according to his last end. If, therefore, all men had the same last end, they would not have various pursuits in life, which is obviously wrong. I mean, and it wouldn't even be good for society, right? So we could add that. And Aquinas acknowledges that in many other places. So this is, a really important objection. If there's one goal, then why don't we all have to live exactly the same? how could there be any room for variation in life if there's only one universal goal for everybody? We'll have to look very carefully at how he responds to that. And then there's the argument from individuality. Again, this is one that would be stressed very much today, but Aquinas deals with it very squarely. Further, the end is the term of action, but actions are of individuals. Now, although men agree in their specific nature, yet they differ in things pertaining to individuals. Therefore, all men have not the same last end. So, since an end is always, end or goal is always connected to an action, actions are always by individuals, each individual is unique. How can we say that there's any goal that everybody is seeking when actions are always so specific to each individual? The objector is saying, yeah, there's a common human nature, but it's just how is it going to show up in each individual person in the very individual actions that they are taking. Now, interestingly, the authority that Aquinas cites in his Sed Contra is St. Augustine. I say it's interesting here because what Augustine is saying here is something that we could find over and over again in Plato or Aristotle and countless other, philosophers. But Aquinas, chooses to make this through Augustine. I would just guess, that he is attempting to really highlight the fact that there's a strong congruence between reason and faith on this question. All men agree in desiring the last end, which is happiness. Notice this is the first time he puts a word on it other than just the end or goal, which could be anything. And he brings in the more specific term, happiness. So this happiness is the universal goal, the goal that is shared by all. In the next episode, we're going to look into, well, what is happiness? How do we achieve happiness? But here he's just establishing that is what we need to look at next, because that is what unifies human beings. Amidst all the diversity of what we're doing, we're seeking happiness. The pursuit of happiness is the common, universal human purpose. So the answer here, this is a very significant breakdown. And again, this is going to be a bridge into the discussion of what is happiness. But for now, Aquinas is not trying to settle that question. He's just trying to establish that is the question that we need to turn to. So he says we could speak of the last end in two ways. First, considering only the aspect of the last end. In other words, abstractly, just to think that there is some goal and that we all maybe implicitly recognize, why am I bothering to do anything? There must be a goal there. But second, considering the thing in which the aspect of the last end is realized. So how do I think I'm going to obtain that goal? That is, of course, a related question. In fact, I can't really think of one without the other, but they are distinct. And obviously, some different people could answer those questions differently. So then, as to the aspect of the last end, all agree in desiring the last end. So what does he mean by that? Because we're looking at it abstractly. So, how many people go around thinking, oh yeah, I better achieve my last end? I don't think anybody does, really, right? Unless you're philosophizing very deliberately, you're probably not thinking in those terms at all. So what does he mean that all agree in this? He says, since all desire the fulfillment of their perfection, and is precisely this fulfillment in which the last end consists, as stated above. So perfection is the idea of completion, that something is complete, something becomes what it really is. Something has everything that it needs, basically, to be what it's supposed to be. So is there anybody who would say, nah, I don't really care about being fulfilled. I don't really care about, achieving, the best possible condition in my life. I'm perfectly fine if everything's a mess in my life and I'm unfulfilled and everything seems wrong in my life. That at that level, I think Aquinas is talking about something that's supremely commonsensical. we all realize that fulfillment, contentment, and what he's going to come to call happiness is the thing that we want. We may have a very definite idea of how to do that. We may be totally confused about how to do that, but we all instinctively understand that that's what we're trying to accomplish. Now, how do we accomplish it? This is where it gets complicated. As to the thing in which this aspect is realized, all men are not agreed as to their last end. So this is important. Aquinas is not the least bit naive or in denial about the not only the diversity of lifestyles, you could say, but the very fact that people actually disagree about what the last end is. They very much do. So again, we have to really distinguish between the subjective and the objective, because at the end of the day, he's going to say disagreement does not change the nature of things. The fact that people may disagree about it does not change the fact that there is a true answer, but it obviously does complicate the context in which we are seeking that answer, because we're going to have to go through those disagreements and work through those disagreements to get there. So since some desire riches as their consummate good, so this, lo and behold, in the Middle Ages or the modern world, it would not be hard to find examples of this. People who think that wealth is going to make them happy. Some pleasure. Again, this is not something to a particular time period or place. People who are chasing pleasure, trying to maximize pleasure. There's whole philosophies who say that happiness is maximizing pleasure. Others, something else. So we can recognize that the two he chooses to, as examples here are, well, first of all, he's going to say they're both wrong answers, but they're errors that come up over and over again. They're errors that we see generation after generation in all different societies. So there's going to be, they tell us something about human nature, even though that they may be wrong. They are characteristic errors of people who are made like we are in the condition that we're in. Thus, to every taste, the sweet is pleasant. So here he's drawing an analogy that, well, everybody likes sweets, but does everybody like the same sweets exactly? No. To some, the sweetness of wine is most pleasant. To others, the sweetness of honey or something similar. So even if you could say, well, everybody likes, sweets or desserts, but does everybody have the same favorite dessert? Or some people might even really not like a particular dessert that somebody else loves. That he's comparing that to happiness. Everybody wants to be happy, but some people think this is going to make them happy. Other people think that would be horrible. I would never want to live that way. Yet that sweet is so now he's going to get to the objective part. He's not going to answer it, but he's going to put down the marker here and say, this is what we need to figure out. That sweet is absolutely the best of all pleasant things, in which he who has the best taste takes most pleasure. So notice how he combines the subjective and the objective. He says, oh yeah, everybody has their different tastes, but the person with the best taste takes pleasure in the best thing. So it's the objective goodness of something that defines, is a taste for it good taste or bad taste. So if something is objectively good and I have a taste for it, that's a good taste that I have. The subjective and the objective are harmonious. But if something is harmful and I have a taste for it, then that's a bad taste that I have. And subjectively, I may desire it and I may find pleasure in it, but objectively, it's bad for me. And so that's a bad taste that I have. In like manner, that good is most complete, which the man with well-disposed affections desires for his last end. So here, the well-disposed affections, this is what Socrates calls the well-ordered soul. If I can train my desires, train my habits and inclinations to be towards what is objectively good, then I have well-disposed affections, I have well-disposed soul, and this is all drawing the subjective and the objective will harmonize. But if I don't, then there's going to be a conflict between what's actually good and what I desire. So that is the stuff of life. That's the challenge of life, both as individuals and collectively. But we still, of course, need to do some more work to actually see, well, what is the objective good, and then how would we harmonize our passions and our habits around that. So we saw that the first objection was from sin. Some people turn away from the good through sin, and we reflected, well, it doesn't change the fact that it's good. But Aquinas says even more here than that. He says, those who sin turn from that in which their last end really consists. So that's what I mentioned before. It still really is good, even though they turn away from it. But he also points out they do not turn away from the intention of the last end. So as he had said in the answer, everybody still wants to be fulfilled. Everybody still wants to be happy. And the good is the thing that will make me happy. So even when I turn away from the good, in the sense I'm rejecting this good, I don't really believe it's good, but it actually is good, and I still want what is actually good. So this is sort of like what Socrates said in the Gorgias, that a tyrant is somebody who doesn't get what he really wants, because what he really wants is happiness, and he's getting everything else but that. And so Aquinas utilizes that argument here to say that sin, it turns us away from the good in a concrete sense, but it doesn't change the fact that we still deep down desire what is truly good. We're just deeply confused about where to find it. Now, from the diversity of pursuits that people have, Aquinas' answer to this is very simple. Various pursuits in life are found among men by reason of the various things in which men seek to find their last end. Here, he's not really distinguishing between those that are true and those that are false. So this is a further refinement that we're going to have to get into later on, is how do we tell whether something is a good diversity or a bad diversity? So is this like multiple ways of actually living a good life, which there are plenty, or is this actually going off the path towards a way of life that is bad? But first, we really need to know more about what the actual good is, what actually makes us happy, which will be the topic for next time. And as for our individuality, Aquinas here again, until he gets into the specifics of what happiness is, he's not going to be able to demonstrate this very specifically, how we all share this. So at this point, he's just saying, look, we all have the same nature. So even though we're individuals, we're unique, but we're all human beings. We all have something in common. And that's what we're looking for here, is to figure out what that is. So what do we know at this point? What we know is that we all are working towards an end. And that's built into reason itself. Reason is in a practical sense, practical reason is thinking about what's good and what would be worthy of doing because it's good. And that we all agree that that end is what is going to fulfill us or make us perfect or make us happy. And all these terms are essentially equivalent, right? Happiness in a classical sense is not a subjective feeling. Happiness is actually being in the best possible condition. And we can all see that that is what we want. We want fulfillment. We want, to be living a good life. We want to have everything that's essential. But what we don't know, or what we disagree about and still need to work through, is what exactly constitutes happiness, what makes us happy. Is it wealth? Well, Aquinas say no. Wealth can be good, but it's not the good, and it often is not good in many contexts. Is it pleasure? Again, pleasure is good in the right context, but pleasure can be harmful. Pleasure is not the good. So where are we going to find this answer? What is actually universally good for human beings, and what is definitive of the happiness that we are seeking? We will turn to that question next time.